All right, hello class. Today we'll be continuing the skeletal system, specifically the axial skeleton. Last class, if you remember, we played a little Jeopardy game, and that was just a brief overview of what the skeletal system is. We went over the axial skeleton, the appendicular skeleton, some different bones, some different diseases or injuries that are common with the skeletal system, and that was just a brief overview of what it is. And then today we'll be going a little more in depth about the axial skeletal system, and then next class we'll be going over the appendicular skeletal system, so we can go a lot more in depth about both of those. And then I have a little worksheet you guys can fill out. 3, 4, 5, 6. Can you pass them back? And you guys can fill this out during the lesson. We should mention all of these bones during the lesson, but there might be one or two that we might not mention, but we'll go over it at the end. It's not great. It's just kind of help you guys really comprehend what you're learning and put it into a picture for you. Before we begin, does anyone remember what the axial skeleton consists of? Lily, do you remember just generally what area of the body or what bones normally make up the axial skeleton?
Like your core body bone?
What was it?
Like your core body bone?
Yeah. Kobe, did you have something to add?
Yeah, they have 80 bones.
Yeah, so it's 80 bones, and then it's like basically your core, your ribs, your vertebrae, your back, your skull. So like Kobe said, it's made up of 80 bones, and it's the head, neck, chest, and spine bones. And then here's a little video.
Wash your body. Do you use a moldy loofah, a dirty washcloth, or you're that guy that just uses their hands? Well,
in March of 2015, American astronaut Scott Kelly and his... An average human body contains 206 bones, ranging in shape and size from the tiny stapes of the inner ear to the huge femur of the thigh. That's a lot of bones to keep tabs on, so anatomists often divide these structures first by location into either axial or appendicular groups. As you might guess, your axial bones are found along your body's vertical axis, in your skull, vertebral column, and rib cage. They're kind of like your foundation, the stuff you can't really live without. They carry your other body parts, provide skeletal support and organ protection. Your appendicular bones are pretty much everything else. The bones that make up your limbs and the things that attach those limbs to your axial skeleton, like your pelvis and shoulder blades, these are the bones that help us move around. From there, bones are generally classified.
That's just a short video about the very basic overview of it. If you've never heard of Crash Course, they have really good videos on basically any digestive system, any science thing, skeletal system. They have really good videos if you're struggling with anything that we are going over. So to start off, some different conditions that can come from the axial skeletal system. You have axial spondylometaphyseal dysplasia, which is a form of dwarfism. So it's a genetic bone disorder that causes shortened height. And then fibrous dysplasia causes bones to break easily. And there can be treatments for this, such as surgery, PT, and medications. And then osteoporosis is a common one. I'm pretty sure we've all heard of that. We usually hear it in older women or older people develop osteoporosis as they start to age, but this is a new bone creation, isn't keeping up with the old bone removal. So your bones are always making new bones, and it's not keeping up with the removal. So this can lead to fragile and brittle bones, and this can also come about from not intaking enough calcium. So in this picture you can see the healthy bone and then what osteoporosis looks like. So that the darkened bone there is just the inability to remove the old bone. So then one of the main parts of the axial system is the skull bones. You have 22 skull bones, 8 cranial bones, and you have the frontal, sphenoid, and then you have 2 temporal, 2 parietal, and then the occipital and ethmoid bones. And then you also have 14 facial bones. So a good mnemonic thing to help remember these is my mouse palate never liked zucchini and vinegar. So the M is mandible, the other M is maxilla, the P is palatine, N nasal, L lacrimal, Z zygomatic, I inferior nasal contra, and V vomer. So then you have 14 of them, but you have 2 different nasal concha, 2 different lacrimal, 2 maxilla, 2 nasal, 2 palatine, and then 2 zygoma. And then skull continued, some functions of the skull are support and protection of the brain. The skull hardens and fuses together to allow for better protection as your body continues to grow and form. And it not only protects the brain, but also nerves and vessels inside the brain. So then here's a better overview of the skull.
The skull is made up of 22 different bones, 8 cranial bones that enclose your brain within the neurocranium, and 14 facial skeleton bones. There are also 6 ear bones. With the exception of the mandible, the bones of the skull are joined by sutures, which are a kind of joint that is synarthrodial. In other words, it can't move. The 8 cranial bones include 1 occipital bone, 1 sphenoid bone, 1 ethmoid bone, 1 frontal bone, a pair of parietal bones, and a pair of temporal bones. The occipital bone is found at the back of the skull. The sphenoid bone can be found in the middle inferior portion of the neurocranium, and it kind of looks like a butterfly. It is in front of the temporal bone and is one of the 7 bones that articulate to form the orbit. The other 6 are the frontal bone, the lacrimal bone, the ethmoid bone, the zygomatic bone, the maxillary bone, and the palatine bone. The ethmoid bone is found between your eyes, located at the roof of the nose, and separates the nasal cavity from the brain. The frontal bone is the bone of your forehead. It has 2 portions, the vertical portion and also the horizontally oriented orbital portion. The remaining 4 bones are a pair of parietal bones and a pair of temporal bones. The parietal bones are joined together at the top of the skull. Together, they form the top and sides of the neurocranium. Each bone is roughly quadrilateral in shape. The temporal bones can be found at the sides and base of the skull. They are overlaid by what we call the temples. It is inside the petrous part of the temporal bone that we find the ossicles. These are the bones of the middle ear and are the smallest bones in your body. A set of 3 ossicles is found on each side of your head, so there are 6 ossicles in total. These bones include the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, also called the malleus, incus, and stapes. The ear canal, which joins the outer and middle ears, is known as the external acoustic meatus. There is also the internal acoustic meatus, which is a tube running from the inner ear to the back of the skull, to what's called the posterior cranial fossa. The 3 fossae of the skull will be discussed in a later video. So those were the 8 cranial bones. Again, these included the occipital bone, the sphenoid bone, the ethmoid bone, the frontal bone, a pair of parietal bones, and a pair of temporal bones. Now for the facial bones. The facial bones include the mandible, the vomer, a pair of maxillae, a pair of palatine bones, a pair of nasal bones, a pair of nasal conchae, a pair of zygomatic bones, and a pair of lacrimal bones. The mandible is your jawbone. It is the largest bone in the human face and is the only movable bone in the skull apart from the ossicle. The other unpaired facial bone is the vomer, which forms the inferior part of the nasal septum and articulates with the sphenoid, ethmoid, palatine bones, and maxillary bones. A pair of maxillae are fused together at the intermaxillary suture to form the bone of the upper jaw. This includes the hard palate in the front of your mouth. The 2 palatine bones, together with the maxillae, comprise the hard palate. They are located at the back of the nasal cavity. The pair of nasal bones form the bridge of the nose and are joined at the internasal suture. The nasal conchae are thin bony elements forming the upper chambers of the nasal cavity. They are composed of 3 pairs, the inferior, middle, and superior conchae. The zygomatic bones, or your cheekbones, articulate with the maxilla, temporal bone, sphenoid bone, and frontal bone. The lacrimal bone is a small bone in the front of the medial wall of the orbit. If you like this video, like and subscribe.
All right, so that just gave a good overview of the different facial bones and some of their functions. So then we move on to the auditory ossicles, which is 6 small bones found within the ear. These are known as the last video touched on it, the malleus, incus, and stapes, which is also known as the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. And these work together to transmit sound waves to the inner ear. And another short video.
Many of us take for granted a very extraordinary organ, our ears. To understand the ear, we need to understand what sound is. The speakers you are listening to right now are vibrating, flexing in and out, causing a wave of pressure through the air. The frequency of these waves, or the speed at which the sound-creating surface moves back and forth, affects the pitch of the sound. The level of air pressure in each wave is directly related to how loud the sound is. The outer part of our ear catches these waves. It faces forward and has a specially designed structure of curves helping us to determine the direction of the sound and also emphasize the frequencies used in human speech. Now that the sound waves are caught, they travel through the ear canal and strike against our eardrum, a thin membrane about 10 millimeters wide. Now that we receive the sound, the middle ear transfers this energy. The smallest bones in your body, the malleus, incus, and stapes, start in motion. The malleus is attached to the eardrum, and as the sound travels along, the force is amplified by leverage until it arrives at the stapes, which acts like a reverse piston, creating waves in the fluid of the inner ear. The most significant increase in pressure is caused by pneumatic amplification. The face of the stapes has a surface area of about 3.2 square millimeters, while the eardrum has a surface area of 55 square millimeters. Using this, along with leverage to the malleus and incus, the final pressure is 22 times greater than when the sound first arrives. Now we come to the most complicated part of the hearing, the cochlea. In reality, it is coiled up, but it is easier to understand straightened out. There are actually 3 chambers inside, but let's take a look at the central part. The stapes is causing pressure waves to travel through the structure. Along the inside wall is about 20 to 30,000 reed-like fibers. As the waves move along, they encounter fibers with the correct resonant frequency and energy is released. These fibers aren't actually what give us the signal that we heard something. There is a special structure next to these fibers containing hair cells. When the fibers resonate, they cause the hair cells to move, which then sends an electrical impulse to the cochlear nerve and onto the brain. Certain pitches of sound will resonate in specific locations, and louder sounds will cause more hair cells to move. Our brain interprets all this raw data, making it possible to enjoy things like music or an engaging conversation.
All right, so that was a little bit more in-depth about the ear and the auditory ossicles. And then next, the main biggest part of the axial skeleton is the vertebral column, which is made up of 26 bones. 24 of these bones make up the vertebrae, and then you also have the sacrum and coccyx. So the 24 vertebrae can be divided into the 7 cervical vertebrae, which is the uppermost part of the spine towards the neck, the 12 thoracic vertebrae, which is the middle of the spine, and then the 5 lumbar vertebrae, which is the lower portion of the spine, and then also the sacrum and coccyx. And then you can see this laid out here with the different vertebrae and where it is on the spine. And then continued with that, some functions of the vertebral column is it provides attachment for many different muscles. It supports your trunk, provides spinal cord and nerve roots, and it provides a spot for hematopoiesis, which means it is a spot for production of blood cells and different platelets. Then we touched on this last class, but some common spinal cord disorders are kyphosis, which is an S shape in the spine, or an exaggerated curve in the thoracic or cervical vertebrae. And then lordosis, which is an L shape in the spine, or an exaggerated curve in the lumbar, and scoliosis, which is a sideways curve in the spine, which is the most common one that we have all heard of and probably know someone with. And then some spinal cord injuries, they most often occur in accidents like car accidents, falls, sports, and randomly, but trampoline accidents. Injuries can cause loss of movement or paralyzation, loss of sensation, things like your ability to feel heat, cold, and touch, and loss of bladder control. And there is no way to reverse a damaged spinal cord. Researchers are working on ways to improve it, but all they can seem to figure out is ways to improve nerve cell regeneration to help improve different nerve functions in the spine. So then we have the rib cage, which protects the heart, lungs, and other organs. It attaches to muscles involved with breathing and arm movement. We can all do this. Inspiration, if we take a big, deep breath, you'll see your ribs will actually elevate and move up. And during expiration, the ribs will then collapse and depress. And the ribs consist of the sternum, which is the middle bone right there that you can all feel, and then 24 ribs, 12 different pairs. The first 7 pairs are true ribs. The 8 to 10 pairs are false ribs, and then you also have 2 pairs of floating ribs down there that we can sometimes forget about, but they're there. And then some common injuries are bruises, torn cartilage, or bone fractures. One of the worst injuries can be a broken rib because there's no treatment for it. You can't get surgery for it. You don't get a cast for it or anything. It's kind of just there, and you have to wait for it to heal. And this is also pretty severe because if you have a broken rib just sticking out there, you see all these different organs that are around it that could potentially be punctured by that rib if it's not taken care of correctly, or if you're not careful about the broken rib. It could very easily hit any of these organs and damage or puncture them wherever the fracture is at. So then, biblical integration: do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. And then also, I just wanted to go over the handout I gave everybody. I think we went over everyone except maybe one. So for number 1, did anyone get what number 1 is? Really? Yeah, number 2? Kobe? Yep. Number 3? Lily? Yeah, number 4? Julia? Number 4? Sorry, yeah, it's kind of confusing. It is the humerus, but it's meaning the middle part of the spine. Sorry, it's confusing. Middle part of the spine, not the rib cage.
Oh, it's spine.
Yeah. Starts with a T.
Oh, grass.
Yeah. And then number 5. Sorry, it was kind of confusing there, yeah. Number 5. Lily?
Your lumbar vertebrae.
Yep. 6. Yep. 7. Lily?
Coccyx.
8. Jake?
Oh, number 8. That is, that is the, I can't remember, I'm sorry.
Kobe?
Kobe knows it, yeah.
Yeah. 9. Josh?
I didn't get
Oh, I guess you weren't here, sorry. 9, Lily?
Is it volar?
What'd you say?
Is it the bone where it's pointing to?
No, it's the right here.
Okay,
Maxilla. And then number 10 is the one below it. So that's the mandible. 12. John Woodard, what'd you get for 12? Yeah. 13. Riley? Yeah, it's just the ribs. 14. I don't think we went over this one. 14 is the coastal cartilage, and then 15 we might not have gone over either, but could we? Yeah, xiphoid process. So that's all I have for today. Next class we'll be going over the appendicular skeletal system.